Whatever you want, man.
We'll type and talk.
Sounds good.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, whenever you are ready.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Living Water Boys. I'm joined this evening by Reverend Big Al in Raleigh, North Carolina, producer Will the Thrill in Columbia, South Carolina, and I am, as always, McBride coming at you live from Alexandria, Virginia. The Living Water Boys, we are delighted to be in your headphones, in your car stereo, or wherever you might be listening to us today. How's it going, fellas?
Doing good.
Great, man. Just good to be together. Feels like it's been a while.
It has, and it is good to be gathered together. Hey, I'm sure you have gathered together with friends recently to watch the World Series. The World Series is going on, really a series for the ages with the Cubs in it. But I don't know. I've been talking to Reverend Big Al, and it sounds like the Cubs aren't the true story for him. What's your thoughts on the World Series so far?
Well, Brian, I got to be honest. I got to eat a lot of crow, and I am man enough to live up to it. Listen, when we talked about the Major League Baseball playoffs a few weeks ago, I was adamant that the Indians just didn't really stand a chance, especially after the injuries to both Carrasco and Salazar knocking them out. I thought their rotation would not stand a chance. I got to be honest. Terry Francona has been nothing short of a magician in these playoffs. I am incredibly impressed with him. He deserves to go straight from this World Series to the Hall of Fame. He has done a phenomenal job with his bullpen. I think really what you got to look at is that Francona has managed the Indians like it was a college baseball team during the College World Series. He brings in his best relief pitcher, Andrew Miller, at any point in the game and just throws him 2 or 3 innings until he gets tired. He's basically getting through the playoffs with 3, maybe 4 pitchers is really about all they got, and it's working. I think had at any point during the playoffs, had they lost any more games than they did, if they would have lost a game to the Red Sox, maybe even a second game to the Blue Jays, I don't know that we'd see them in this round because they just don't have the pitching depth. But the reality is Francona has made the few pitchers he has work it out to go this far, and I couldn't be more impressed with what they've done. I know we're sitting here during the midst of Game 5. I know the Cubs are up right now. Yet to see. I do think the Cubs pull it out tonight at home and extend it. I actually think the Cubs are going to win Game 6 also against Tomlin, and we're going to get a rematch back. Not a rematch, but a Game 7 between Kluber and Hendricks on Wednesday night in Cleveland. And that one will certainly be interesting. Kluber, I mean, it's just been phenomenal throughout the playoffs, and I think he comes up big again in Game 7, and he walks away with the MVP of the World Series. Brian, what are your thoughts on the playoffs thus far?
Well, on the playoffs thus far, I got to admit that it hurts that the Washington Nationals are no longer in the playoffs. But honestly, it's gone as expected. If you all listen to my predictions, I had Cleveland in the World Series against, of course, the Nats. But if I wouldn't pick them, of course, it'd be the Cubs. I am a little surprised how flat they came out in games 3 and 4. But I agree with you. I don't think they're dying early. You know, it's going to be tough to take their last breath. And I would still hold out hope, if you're a Cubs fan, that there is some celebration. You know, I noticed when watching the Cubs in the World Series, we had a listener question come in. You can always ask us questions when you're watching sports using hashtag AskLWB. So what was that question we got asked about the Cubs?
Our hashtag LWB comes from our loyal listener, Joel Dude, Twitter handle at Joel Dude. He asked, should Chicago forgive Bartman or should it apologize to him?
Wow, what a question, and especially a perfect question for the Living Water Boys, a podcast that focuses on the intersection of faith and sports. And I think this hits right at the core. You know, really, Brian, for me, it starts with grace. And I don't really see how Chicago doesn't forgive Bartman. I mean, really, who isn't at fault somewhere along the lines? I mean, there are lots of fans that might have done the same thing. You certainly can't blame Bartman for the Cubs losing and making all the mistakes that happened after that fateful play in Game 6 in 2003, or the management of the Cubs for the moves they've made since then that have led to the Cubs not making the World Series until this year. I think the reality is that it's not Bartman's fault that the Cubs haven't won since 1908. I mean, think about all the opportunities they could have had for all those years since then, almost 100 years before 2003 when Bartman was in the stands. To pick him out of the scapegoat really is unfair. And if nothing else, Christ teaches us that we should forgive. And I think Chicagoans should do that with Steve Bartman. What are your thoughts?
Well, in addition to Bartman, if you have issue with him, you got to have issues with Pryor. You got to have issues with the rest of the team who just could not close against the Marlins.
Moises Alou didn't catch the pop-up, and he urinates on his hands when he's not hitting the ball well.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm a Cubs fan, maybe I'll cut them some slack because that's when the Marlins were represented by all of Florida and not just Miami. So clearly they were a more powerful force back then. But
Josh Beckett had a great postseason.
He did. It simply boils down to this. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. So take note, Cubs fans.
We want to be sheep and not goats. We want to be sheep and not goats. And hopefully the Chicagoans are on that side too.
Yeah. So, I think it would be beautiful if they win, if there was some sort of reconciliation, if the dividing wall was knocked down, so to speak.
If they win, shouldn't it be win or lose? I mean, what does Bartman have to do with this postseason?
Oh, I think it should be win or lose, but I think these fans are too thirsty for excuses to reconcile in the face of a loss.
That's the problem with our society today. Everyone's just looking for a scapegoat, and everybody wants to point the finger at everybody but themselves. I'm looking for the Cubs to own up to what they haven't done instead of pointing the finger at poor Steve Bartman and making an example out of him. When there was a woman caught in adultery, Jesus didn't point the finger at her. He wrote in the sand and invited everyone else to reflect on their own sins. And I wish there was a Jesus today when Steve Bartman was being crucified in that same way.
Yeah. Hey, we could talk about this for a long time. And thanks to Joel Dude for tweeting at us, #AskLWB. Remember, you can always do the same.
No one's more loyal.
The show. But loyal listener, Joel Dude, we love you. Hope all is well in Rallywood. Now, speaking of pointing fingers when things go wrong, there was a lot of finger pointing this summer during free agency, a lot of finger pointing with the Kevin Durant saga, and we're finally getting to see how that is playing out as the NBA season starts. It started last week. I know I've been pretty excited to see it begin, but there are some real storylines this year that are worth following. I mean, the NBA could have its own reality TV show that traces what's going on. That it's here, and I'm just sitting back and relaxing and knowing I've got action until June. So what do you have your eye on, Reverend Big Al?
Well, certainly a couple things. Obviously, the biggest storyline in the NBA this season is, will we see the rubber match of this epic 3-year series between the Cavaliers and the Warriors? All signs point to the Cavs coming out of the East, the Warriors coming out of the West, the Warriors having added Durant. Will they break their own wins record that they set a year ago? Will they reclaim the title from the Cavs? How do they match up? I mean, I think, sure, they gave up Barnes. They gave up Bogut. They went after Durant. They have a powerful spread the floor scoring lineup, but I'm not sure excuse me, I'm not sure they have the rim protection. I'm not sure that they have the depth in the bench to compete with the Cavaliers, who just certainly look loaded. They're coming in with a lot of confidence. Brian, do you see anybody in either conference that can compete with either of these teams? Say, maybe even the Spurs, who defeated the Warriors on opening night on last Tuesday?
I think the Spurs definitely could compete. It's all about the big name stars, but it's also about the man behind the clipboard. And if Pop's in charge of a team, I got full faith in them for challenging. But in terms of complete teams to challenge the Cavs or the Warriors, outside of the Spurs, I really don't see one. But in terms of people, particular players who would rise to the challenge, I am really interested to see what Russell Westbrook does. I think this could be the year that he breaks out and is an absolute star. His loyalty to Oklahoma City this summer with signing the extension, I think, was huge. And he's got the keys to that franchise, and I'm interested to see how he drives it. I'm really excited this week to see him go against Golden State, and I think we're going to see some fire from him. I don't think he has a supporting cast to challenge for a title, but I think we could see something
count big
special.
four and white guys.
Yeah. Hey, enough about the West, though.
Well,
We know
speaking
the
of forgiveness,
action-
can't wait to see that Westbrook versus Durant matchup coming up. Has a lot of Bartman parallels, don't you think?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if there's a handshake beforehand, what all goes down with that. But, I'm a big fan of the NBA East. Doesn't get a lot of love, but hey, we're the champs sitting in the East. So you have your eye on anybody in the East this year? I mean, of course, the Wizards, obvious choice for a team that's going to be awesome, but who else?
Sure, absolutely. I think the East after Cleveland is wide open. We have the Pacers going with a new coach and new up-tempo system with some additional players added in the offseason. Miles Turner looking to break out. We have the Celtics having added Horford around their talented guards. I'm interested to see who stands out. Certainly our local team here in Raleigh is the Hornets. We're so glad Charlotte has the Hornets back. Got rid of the Bobcats. What a terrible nickname that was. But I got to be honest, I think the Hornets are back where they always find themselves, which is what I call NBA no man's land. Listen, when you're in the NBA, you're looking for one of three things at all times. One is top 10 to 15 player in the NBA talent, right? Do the Hornets have any top 10 to 15 players? No. Kemba is not one of those guys, and he's not going to become one, right? Yeah, he can put up his 25 points once in a while, but he is not going to be a star that leads you to a title. Batum, same thing. He's French. He got paid. We're not going to look for him to put up big numbers this year, right? So if you don't have top 10 to 15 talent, what do you want? One of two things. You want A, salary cap space. Do the Hornets have that? Nope, because they just spent all their money on Nicholas Batum. Already talked about him. Or two, you want draft picks. Do the Hornets have that? Nope, because when they could have had a first-round pick in last summer's draft, they traded it for Marco Bellinelli. Listen, what are they doing? They're going to be stuck around seed 6, 7, or 8, again, going nowhere. And listen, I don't mean that they need to bottom out. I don't mean that they need to give up on the season. But unless you're getting top draft picks, you're clearing out salary cap space, or you already got some of those top NBA talent, you're not going anywhere. Now they're wrestling with if they should re-sign Cody Zeller or not. Listen, re-signing Cody Zeller doesn't put you over the top. But if you don't re-sign him, you can't replace him because your team's terrible. I'm really disappointed with how they've managed the team, and I'm certainly not optimistic on their future. It looks pretty bleak, while a lot of other teams in the East are moving on up.
Speaking of moving on up, something I'm wondering, I'd love to get your guys' thoughts or our listening thoughts on this, is we have seen an absurd amount of money thrown around this NBA offseason. You referenced, particular players who have gotten paid. I wonder, these players that have cashed out so much, do they really care if they make the playoffs? Do they really care if they have a ring? Or are they sitting there checking their bank statements, seeing how fat their pockets are? And heck, if you don't make the playoffs, just get a quick jump on vacation. So what do you guys think? Do you think these players are really in it to win it? Or with all this money in the NBA now, is those accolades kind of second nature to signing the contracts?
Oh, gosh, absolutely not. They don't care. Listen, half these guys won't play on a back-to-back. Are they looking for status? Are they looking for the Hall of Fame? No, they're looking for cash. Last time I checked, nobody got a bonus for making the Hall of Fame after they retired. But you know what you do get bonuses for? That's right, bonuses. Because you put that salary in your paycheck, get it in your contract, and take it to the bank. Excuse me, not the bank, vacation. which usually happens on a deserted island or a yacht halfway around the world. Listen, these guys already have countdowns in their lockers looking forward to the end of the season in April. And I bet most of them don't care if they don't make the playoffs.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there needs to be some more accountability in the salary structure because, with this crazy money going around, this happens. That's why some people prefer the college sports, without the big money's driving it and really pride and wanting to get to the next level. So speaking of players who are not getting paid, despite the fact that they probably should, but that's a topic for another conversation. This week, our student athletes in the NCAA FBS division are going to see their rankings for the first time, thinking towards the college football playoff, which you heard a lot about in the debate pod. But we got the rankings coming out this weekend. Big Al, should I care? Are you going to be watching?
Absolutely not. Not only will there be lots of other legitimate sporting events on, whether it's NBA, potentially the World Series Game 6, or heck, even replays of football games I already watched, because that would be a lot more interesting than catching up on these college football rankings. Listen, we're a month early on these things. All the teams have tough games coming up. I know Alabama will probably be number one. They're playing in Baton Rouge against LSU on Saturday, right? We know Clemson would have the conference championship game. Michigan's got to worry about Ohio State or other games, such as potentially the Big Ten championship. Listen, it is way too early for us to be worried about who is in the top four and who's not. There's so much more to work itself out. I am not interested at all in these playoff rankings. I don't even think they should be on TV for another month. Don't even release them. For the NCAA basketball tournament, they don't release rankings throughout the season. They just have one reveal, and it's right when the tournament's about to start. I don't see why we need all this in football, and I don't care to see it, and I won't stand for it. I'm not watching it. I'm boycotting it. That's right. I use the B word.
Wow. So you hear there from Big Al, Living Water Boys, officially boycotting. I agree. I don't think that –
I've got a voice, and I'm not afraid to use it, McBride.
Yeah, I know the Caps play. I would rather watch the NHL on Tuesday than these rankings come out. But you know what? ESPN knows what they're doing. There is big money in all this, and they are going to drag out these shows, and people are going to get paid. But, hey, the chance to see Kirk Herbstreit just talk from his home in that great little studio, that might be worth a peek. But outside of that, not very interested.
Oh, is that what happens? Because I've literally never watched it. And you know what I saw too much of? Kirk Herbstreit's son on game day Saturday. I don't care to see who his son picks. And yeah, for you listeners at home, I was using air quotes because I don't think his son made any of those picks at all. I think it's a farce, and I won't stand for it. Get these kids off the TV.
Wow, you heard it here. Hey, just one more thought on that. I'm curious to see how Louisville is rated with their only loss coming in that heartbreaker to Clemson. Though the Who's scared them this weekend, I'm interested to see how they're rated.
I certainly think they have a good chance to make it as a one-loss team. They're currently ranked number 5 in most of the polls, and I think they'll stay there throughout the end of the season. It'd be amazing if the ACC ended up with 2 teams in. Louisville had that down-to-the-wire game at Clemson on a big Saturday night stage. Really think they deserve to get in if some of these other teams can't stay undefeated throughout the season. But without being a conference champion, it'll be interesting to see how the playoff committee handles them coming out of the ACC without even making the championship game.
Yeah, hey, don't sell the ACC short. I think they could have 2 teams. Heck, why not 3? I could see the Hokies or the Tar Heels in there. Just kidding.
I mean, let's be honest. Is anybody else that good? Has Michigan played anybody decent this year? I mean, sure, you could beat Hawaii by 60 points. You didn't even tell them it was on your depth chart. Who cares, all right? Wake me up when they play someone not in the Big Ten that's legitimate and in the Power 5. Don't think they have.
They have not. But, you can see those on Tuesday, and I guarantee you'll hear some thoughts on that from us, particularly the Reverend Big Al, who can get a little heated over these ratings.
But you'll have to tweet us about it because I for sure am not watching on Tuesday.
Okay, we'll keep the Reverend Big Al updated. Hey, it's that time of our show where we go to our sponsor. Podcasting, it ain't free. And here at the Living Water Boys, we've got a fabulous producer, and we've got so much content that the World Wide Web costs to host it. So if you're interested in sponsoring us, tweet us at Living Water Boys, Gmail livingwaterboys@gmail.com. But we got a sponsor today, so let's roll the tape.
This episode's sponsor comes from WD3 Productions. For all your production needs, call WD Productions, D3 Productions, or email us at wdproductions@gmail.com. We do weddings, photography, any kind of videography needs. Again, if you need any production services, contact WD3 Productions. Thank you.
Well,
Wow.
and as always, we're grateful for our many sponsors to the show. It's just sponsors like WD3 Productions that help keep us going on a regular basis so that we can produce content and you can consume the content, our faithful listeners. So we appreciate WD3 coming through here and happy to have them and any other sponsors. As always, if you'd like to sponsor the show, just reach out to us, livingwaterboys@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on Twitter @livingwaterboys. But McBrien, let's transition. Want to hit some church things. I know it's been a couple of weeks with us being away from the pod, but had a chance to bring the word to the church a couple of weeks ago, focusing on the lectionary text for the day on October 16th, which was Luke chapter 18, 1 through 8. The parable of the widow and the unjust judge, if you will, or as I called it, the parable of the squeaky wheel. A story, as many of you have heard, I'll touch on it real quick. It's just that there was a judge in a city who neither feared God nor had respect for people. And in that city, there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice." And while the judge refused, but later said to himself, "I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone. Yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming and asking." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them." A passage that I've heard referred to many times, especially in teaching or in reflecting on how we can all be persistent in our own prayer life with God. But in my reflection and in really discerning what the Holy Spirit might be leading me to bring as a word to our folks in our community of faith, really was led to think about the woman and how she was a squeaky wheel. We all know that expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I usually think of that expression as being related to people who are just whiny, and who maybe are high maintenance, who don't mind speaking up to get what they want, to get what they need. And usually, I'll be honest, I look down on those folks. I try to be one that always says, "Hey, you know what? I'm fine. I can make do. I can handle with what I got. No issues." And I think, what this passage, as I reflect on it, what it's telling me is that, Brian, I think sometimes God wants us to be the squeaky wheel. I think God says, "Listen, I know you guys can't handle it. I know everything's not fine. And so just come to me. Lay your cares upon me." And I think in the same way that the woman treats the judge like a squeaky wheel, she pesters the judge until she gets what she needs because she's desperate. She really has no other choice. A woman in that day and age wouldn't have owned property, especially as a widow, because it would have been passed down to her husband's siblings or her sons. And so really without the judge, she had no one to look out for her. And so she had nowhere else to turn. So no wonder she was persistent in going to the judge. And so, Brian, as I think about us, what I realize is we should be a desperate people too. And we should be a squeaky wheel, and how often we turn to God and pester God on our own behalf, saying, God, we need you. We can't go on without you, and we need you to intervene on our behalf, just like the judge intervenes for this woman. So the title of the sermon that day, The Squeaky Wheel Gets the Grease. It gave me an opportunity to share some stories of how I've experienced squeaky wheels in my own life. But yeah, that's kind of where we went with that. Do you have any questions, comments, any follow-up?
Well, I know that we have some other ministers who listen to this, some who preach once a month, some who preach every week. Personally, I'm more of a once a month type of guy in my current setup, but I'm always interested to hear about the sermon writing process for you. So first off, thank you for sharing. I'm sure your congregation was very blessed by your words and enjoyed what you had to share. Was this one of those sermons that you just knew what was going to happen, or was it one of those that just kind of hits you at about 11:30 on Saturday night?
I got to be honest, most sermons hit me about 11:30 Saturday night. I've been known to rewrite them even later than that and just come up with something in the morning. It works out really well, too, when I do that, because I'm able to really lower expectations on Sunday by telling everyone I rewrote it on Saturday night. It gives me a lot of sympathy when it's not a well-prepared sermon. But this is one that had kind of been sitting on my heart for a while, and I felt pretty good about the direction it went. I think where I got stuck Saturday night was, sure, we kind of looked down on the squeaky wheels, and this woman's being a squeaky wheel, but what does that mean for us? So it was helpful to think about how I think maybe God does want us to be more of a squeaky wheel with God, because whenever we're a squeaky wheel, we're admitting that we are in need. And I think really our relationship with God should start with us recognizing that we are in need. And so it was a call to remember that really we are nothing without the help of the Lord.
So something that really interests me when it comes to sermon preparation is titling. Reverend Big Al and I are really into sermon titling. So what was this one titled? Was it cool? Because as loyal listeners of Living Water Boys know, we don't like to have boring sermon titles. We like to make them fun. When you open that bulletin and see the sermon title, you got to think, wow, pumped to hear this. So
well,
what was yours?
Even more so, Brian, I'll add to that. A lot of our folks will look at the bulletin when it gets posted to the website on Thursday before the service on Sunday, and I will bet you that they are looking at it to make a decision on if they're going to attend or not on Sunday. So it's helpful to make it appear that it's going to be something worthwhile. So as I said, for me, I went with the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Figured we're going to throw out the expression. I'm just going to hit it head on. I think it probably caught some attention, but it certainly was a little bit unique. I think that's not something people usually see as a sermon title. Do you have any suggestions or any other sermon titles based on what we were thinking of that we could have gone with?
Squeaky wheel gets the grease. I think when people saw that posted, they get excited. I'm a fan of kind of changing popular sayings or song lyrics. Both the Reverend and Big Al and I preached on the last chapter in John, I think it's chapter 20, where Jesus makes breakfast for the disciples, specifically Peter, and I called it Breakfast at Galilee instead of Breakfast at Tiffany's. And I think one person out of 150 people in worship got it. But you know what? It was worth it for that one.
Yeah, about a year ago, similar story for me, preaching on blind Bartimaeus in Mark 10, I went with Christian Vacation, commenting on the way that really everyone tried to give Jesus a vacation when blind Bartimaeus was calling out to him, but all the people, but Jesus refused to let it be a vacation and was willing to engage with Bartimaeus. But the best part was I was obviously playing on, not obviously, but I was playing on Christmas Vacation, the popular movie starring Chevy Chase, and I actually had a member of the congregation stop me afterwards and say, I was waiting for you to mention Chevy Chase. So she obviously didn't get that I'd called it Christian Vacation and not Christmas Vacation. So I don't know, Brian, maybe something that, can go a little bit off topic, can maybe distract some of our listeners. Be interested to hear from many of our loyal listeners to the Living Water Boys podcast and see if there's anything, any reflections they have on sermon titling. Does it actually help to come up with something different and interesting? Or does that, in the end, distract either the congregation or distract the sermon preparer himself from adding making the message exactly what it could be? So I know I'm going to stick with making interesting titles, but that's certainly something I'd be willing to listen to some of our listeners on and see what they have to say.
Yeah, let us know if you have a particularly awesome sermon title you've heard. Tweet that to us, hashtag AskLWB. We'll find it there. I think that your sermon title about Christian vacation sounds awesome. I love vacations. I'm sure some of our listeners, they might not know, but Reverend Big Al really inspires me in the way that he takes vacation seriously. Been on some great ones with him, and
it's not just a place to stay; it's a way of life, Brian.
A way of life. And hey, we're gonna have our next way of life vacation time in December, I think. Just a little teaser, but you might see some fun surrounding that. Hey, I'm gonna close with an awesome story. Talking about the sermon writing process. I think it was summer 2015. I was living in Raleigh. Reverend Big Al was living in Raleigh, and we were both preaching on the following Sunday. So it's Saturday night. We're preaching the next morning. I've, as I usually do on Saturday night, felt good, wrapped it up. I texted Reverend Big Al and said, "How's it going?" And he said, "Man, I really need to start writing this sermon, but I'm locked into the Hornets Summer League game." That is something, if I knew my pastor was locked into a Hornets Summer League game on a sermon, I would think that I want shepherding the.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that I got a lot of sermon illustrations from that Summer League game, but the reality is sports fandom doesn't take a vacation, and so neither do we here at the Living Water Boys. Will the Thrill, you want to wrap us up for the episode?
Most definitely. Guys, this has been a great episode. I want to add one quick thing. This November, the Living Water Boys will be participating in No Shave November. Now, I can't speak for the rest of you, but my beard growing skills are not at 100% right now. But that being said, as No Shave November works, we will be taking donation if you feel that you are so obliged. And we will be taking that money and giving it to our favorite charity. If you want to contact us, and feel free to donate, contact us at our Gmail account, livingwaterboys@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining us on our 11th episode of the Living Water Boys. Remember, we're on Twitter at the Living Water Boys, or contact us by email, livingwaterboys@gmail.com. Thank you, and have a good night.
Take luck.